If you go on Google and you search Joe Maddox RX7, what pops up is a list of threads from various rotary websites, the RX7 Club and NoPistons.com. These threads are very easy to explain. Simply put, they're the moderators of a website I pissed off. Joe Maddox is my actual account. It is one word. I was there from 2009 to 2010. It was a short-lived experience. As you can tell by my trader feedback, I sold many things. 52 is the number, however I cannot access it anymore to show the actual number, because when you have multiple transactions with the same person, you're not allowed to have a boost in trader score. I had over 100, and that was just within the first year. By selling so many things, it caught their attention. At a point in time, I was selling a group of items. A moderator was interested in one of them. I sold it locally before he had the posts actually put up, and when he did, he confronted me about how he wanted it. I said, I'm sorry, it was sold last night. He got really pissed off about that and decided that maybe I shouldn't be selling unless I was a vendor on their site, which means I have to pay them a monthly fee and subscribe to all of their rules and regulations of being a vendor. I'm not a vendor and I wasn't looking to be one. I'm just a guy that had a car and was trading and selling some of the parts that I didn't need off of it and some of the parts on the parts car that I got for it. And that was it. However, I refused to be a vendor, and when I sold again, they permanently banned me from the site. I never had any problems with any of the transactions I had, and in fact there was many threads made about how it was unfair that I was banned. So 3 years later, when Jared Carpenter posted ripped off by JM Classic Imports and Joe Maddox, I wasn't surprised to find the moderators immediately bashing me. Since I was not able to respond on RX7 Club, I responded on No Pistons instead. We had had many conversations through Facebook Messenger about how to install the motor correctly. He knew that I used, as Pineapple Racing and many other engine builders do, use Crisco to install seals as well as use it as assembly lube and startup lube. He claims that the motor came with no instructions, however I walked him through these steps on Facebook through Messenger. He decided to focus more on the externals that were given to him for free, and it was made very clear from the beginning that I only sold kegs, as externals are usually too hard to source, and most people need to have their externals placed from their original block onto these kegs. I had a good deal of Series 5 and random parts around, and I decided to throw in what I had for free. The spark plugs were just to seal up the holes the best I could. They were not new. No engine is ever included with new spark plugs. His final comment on me being the #1 sticky on the RX7 Club was mildly amusing, considering he was the reason I was a sticky on the RX7 Club. When everyone started asking him to make teardown videos of the motor, he had a great deal of reasons why he couldn't get to it. When I instructed him through Facebook Messenger on how exactly to free up the Crisco, and that he just needed to put some heat directly into the exhaust sleeve, as 400 degrees plus comes out of it, it will be very easy to put 100 degrees in to loosen up the Crisco and make the rotating assembly spin freely. He told me that he took a heater and put it in front of the car and blew hot air on the outside of the engine block, and that was good enough to heat up the internals of the engine and loosen all the Crisco, while it's not even 30 degrees outside. I had just built one of my first motors at FD3S Engineering for one of my cars at home. Mark had me clean up everything and stack the engine while he instructed me how to do it. And I had gotten it all buttoned up, and when I finally got around to getting it ready for my car, my friend had blown his motor. I decided to go ahead and sell it to him at cost so he could get back on the road, and I started building myself another motor. After he got all the internals and everything buttoned up and the wiring done, which he did a beautiful job on, and some confusion as to why the engine was having such a hard time turning over and how it is that he might be able to get around it, afraid that maybe it was a stuck seal or potentially something had come loose. It turned out that it was nothing and he needed a pull start. The Crisco had hardened, and this was our first experience with this. As you can see and hear, it turned out beautiful. Well, it should have ended there, but unfortunately, because of the fight me and the RX7 moderators had out, it didn't end there. It only escalated because of their rants about the improper use of Crisco, disregarding that the greatest shops use it freely. I started building many rotary engines after that, couple for my friends, couple for myself. I found I had a knack doing it, and it was a lot of fun. I started installing every type of motor, completely stock, stock modified, Eventually, I'd gotten so good that I had been building turbo motors that had completely and utterly nothing to do with the factory, like this 6-port turbo motor. I'd eventually gotten good enough at installing them by myself, custom tuning, electrical, wiring, lighting, interior, and body modifications, that I decided to go ahead and open up Rotary Works. I had the property to do so. I had earned my way to a very decent living. I had a huge shop with plenty of space, and I had all the cars that I wanted for myself. So I decided, why not go ahead and work on other people's cars? I started working on a couple other people's RX7s, making sure they were tuned right, doing repairs and touch-ups to make sure they looked as new as possible. I had asked my friend Chris to join me in this. He's the one who I'd built the red car for previously, and he helped me create the name Rotary Works. He was a passionate Rotary fan, and he had done a great job assembling the externals on his car as well as the wiring and exhaust. Unfortunately, our first couple of customers was his best friend and roommate, followed by another shop owner for the local Rotary business in Salem, who seemed to have a hard time troubleshooting that he had dead injectors and needed verification, which was disconcerting to me considering they were the shop owners and they shouldn't have a hard time troubleshooting the simple problems. I would have preferred we were all just hanging out instead of having to pretend like this was a shop endeavor. This wasn't the shop work I was looking to do. I was hoping to do custom builds. So when my friend Jeremy came along and I had a couple first-gen RX7s, he took one over and we started a build. He ended up getting an Atkins build kit, and we started on it. Thoroughly cleaned and prepped the rotors, got everything assembled, stacked the keg, got it all buttoned up. He was unsure as to what paint color he wanted to go with, so we waited. I got the rest of it mostly assembled, then he decided he wanted it red and black. I painted it up really quick. There was a point of time when my son came in to help me. He turned a bolt for me. I completely forgot to unturn the water pump bolt. The motor sat completely assembled, ready to go. I was waiting for Jeremy to swing over and check out the status of it. I wanted him to be there for the installation. We got it all mostly tucked up, just about ready. At that time, I was also building this Series 5 turbo motor. I was getting it prepped and ready to go into the other first gen, which was a right-hand drive Savannah. I'd had a couple right-hand drives before this. One of them was a very nice custom built. The other one, it was a kind of a rust bucket, so we ended up having to give it a donor car to save it. This was that donor car. Turned out very nice. Everything was very clean on it. Jeremy ended up taking over this car. I ended up wanting to put him in a nice one. He was our first real customer, and he was really interested in going into a deep build, so I wanted to make sure the deep build he went into was worth it, and the previous car he had wasn't the best of shells to start with, and this one definitely was. That same time, that was when Jared Carpenter ended up wanting the motor from me. I packed it on up as he requested. I made sure it was done very professional. I knew the motor was a solid motor. It was still spinning freely and was only a week or two old. It was all wrapped up, crated up, and the guys came and picked it up and took it straight off to him. Right about then, I noticed that Chris had gotten a hold of a couple guys and got us started on a chump car endeavor. I wasn't very interested in doing the chump cars, but I thought it was fun that Chris was going to be doing that, and I thought it would be neat to have a few pictures of what he was doing. Chris came over and started working on them religiously. He spent about a week tinkering on them before he found out that one of them had a blown motor and the other one needed some distributor work. I packed up the cars and sent them back, deciding that this wasn't really the work that we were looking to do because the guys weren't really wanting to spend any money on them to fix them correctly. However, I noticed that Chris was not very happy about that. He was really only interested in doing this. That got me thinking. He hadn't really been any help with Jeremy's car or the previous builds before that. Started thinking about all the builds that I had been going through and all the times that I'd been doing wrench work, the motors and the installs, the troubleshooting, and all of the times that I was completely and utterly alone or had to use hired hands to help me with the two-man jobs. Jeremy's car was never supposed to be a paying build. The chump cars paid pennies, however, it was unsatisfying work. Jeremy's car was going to be satisfying, and still we would be able to promote it to further extend our business and show our skills. However, I started to realize that every time I was building, he wasn't there, but every time I had finished building, he was there to take a picture. So much so that I started taking notice of it. I started taking notice that he was mostly showing up when he thought he was going to be getting something for free, which he usually did, such as this Cosmo 13B REW motor that was in perfect condition. He had talked many times before about going V8 if that motor ended up failing, and I was very concerned that he was going to, as my business partner, leave the rotary scene, so I gifted him the motor to assure that he would stay, as I promised I would rebuild it for him. When we first met, I had a very simple little blue first gen. I had had a few dozen RX7s before that, but nothing spectacular. I ended up buying another RX7. It turned out to be okay. It was a nice little compilation of a few different cars, and he had done a pretty good job of it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. The next car I bought was a very nice one. It was a heavily modified car I bought up in Washington. I got it for very cheap. I actually only spent $300 on it. It didn't run, it needed some tinkering. Literally, all I had to do was flush the fuel system, and Chris tinkered on the carburetor to adjust the float, and that was it. It worked fine. I had started working on a lot of cars after that. I'd probably pushed through a dozen of them in just a month's time. I started attending all the meets with Chris and his roommate and the moderator of the RX7 club in the Northwest. I ended up becoming friends with most of them. I say most because I was never really friends with Chris's roommate. We didn't ever seem to get along. After a certain point, I had gathered a few RX7s that were really nice, and my first gen collection was getting pretty neat looking. I had told Chris when I had come over to his house several times that if he wanted to go ahead and find himself a body kit, even if it was destroyed and completely useless, I could go ahead and fix it. I had spent years previously doing body repair to various classics, and I'm sure I could put something together for him. They seem like pretty easy cars to build. He actually met me when I was putting together a '63 Pontiac Grand Prix for my wife. I ended up bringing his car into the shop and doing his body kit. There's actually a build video on YouTube. You can see all the work that I did to it. His contribution to it isn't featured in it though, because it isn't the greatest of work and I had to go over and fix it. He was only allowed to help me one day after that when I sanded the clear coat off. At a point in time after I'd finished his body kit, he started driving it around and I was buying and selling a lot of things on the RX7 club, not yet banned. This was in 2009-2010. I started hearing that he was saying things. The local moderator came over one day and told me that Chris had been claiming the car as his build and that he did it. I found this to be hard to stomach, so I decided that I was just going to disregard it. I actually butted heads with the moderator then and started my downward progression with the club because of that. Flash forward a few years later, my wife had ended up introducing Chris to my Aunt Sarah. They ended up hitting it off because they were both previously divorced. I ended up finding out after she had left him a few months later that she had no idea I had anything to do with the car. He had gone out of his way to make sure they all were under the impression that he had built it. So now it starts to dawn on me how the Jared Carpenter video actually came to light. Despite all the people asking for teardown in the videos and his dodging of it, it was amazing to me when I found finally Chris posting on that same thread, when Chris should have been the one person who could have cleared all of this up with a simple conversation telling him how he experienced the exact same thing when he got the motor from me that sat for a year, that I had built at FD3S Engineering at the beginning of the video, that had the same assembly lube and the same practice done. And all he had to do was tell him that he had to go through the same steps. It spun slow, it had a hard start, it was lacking in compression. He gave it a push start, he smelled donuts, he fired it up, it was beautiful running, and he hasn't looked back for 5 years. It's only been one of the greatest motors he's ever had. So why didn't this happen? Why didn't Chris say anything? How could this thread still exist? Even if he didn't see the video, he should know that's how it was built. He knew it was Jeremy's motor. He knew Jeremy. He knew that we had assembled it, and it was assembled no different than all the other motors that he had seen fire up from my hands. It had finally dawned on me, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I had to face the facts. Chris has been lying to me, and I don't really know the guy. I spent the next couple of weeks trying to figure out how exactly I could get to know him better, and I didn't really like what I had found. Some time had passed, and I had decided that I wasn't really interested in knowing him personally. It had become blatantly clear to me that he was taking credit for my work, from his car, to all the times that he was there just accrediting himself with the work that I had done because of his ability to be present. So the last day we met, he came over as I was working on a car on my trailer. He came over to try and clear up the air as to why everything was all messed up. I wasn't interested in talking to him about the personal stuff. Talking to him about maybe, I don't want to know you because I don't think I like who you are. I decided instead just to focus on the problems that started it all, and that is, I think you're taking credit for my work. I touched off firstly with his car because that's the most important thing. Simply because when I built the car for him, it was only under one condition. I did it for him for free, under the condition that he just tell people who ask who built the car that I did. And I found that he was taking credit. He actually responded back with a very simple thing. Ownership is 9/10 of the law. It's my car, and I'll take credit if I want. I was a bit awestruck. I didn't know what to say. I just kind of left it at that. I told him Rotary Works is his. He can have it for $1. I don't want it anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. I then started JM Classic Imports. I told him I was not going to be working with the chump car groups. Also, I was not going to be working with the local rotary shops. I was only interested in helping the people who actually needed their cars worked on and probably couldn't afford anyone else. He was not interested in working for free. I had officially had it with the RX7 community and all of the people like him. The majority of people who owned the rotary shops were silver spoon kids who worked out of their parents' house or were given houses by their parents. He was no exception to this. He and I were just fine and had the means to do this. This is why I expected him to help with people like Jeremy, who didn't have the means to build cars like we had the means to build. I was not expecting him to put hundreds of dollars in parts into it as I had done. I was just expecting him to lend his hands, as he did to me with the blue car when we first met, years before. Well, imagine my surprise when I find a video a week later of him at the Woodburn drag strip doing a quarter-mile run, showing off his car and everything that's been done to it, talking about the engine, and talking about the body kit's aerodynamics, and talking about how it does in general. However, he doesn't mention once my name. In fact, when he says built not bought in the end of it, he puts his own email address up with his new rotary company. He immediately pulled the video and put up a thread on the RX7 Club. It was lengthy. He posted the video that was in question. He talked about how he'd been on and off my friend, but that was more or less him trying not to mention that he was with my aunt, and that she called him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and left him. I was starting to realize why she called him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as I started to notice that he had subscribed to Jared Carpenter long before he had told me that he even knew anything was going on, and that he had befriended Jared Carpenter before we had even split Rotary Works. He truly was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I didn't see it coming. A few people posted on the thread, but mostly just one person pointing out that he had been defending me. Then another person posted that made sense. I had a kind of a feud with him about his business's practices, and I didn't think that either of us should be taking it so seriously, considering he has had just as many mistakes and just as much bad luck as I have in mine. So in the end, the video that Jared posted was pulled, and I never got a teardown video. He never got to explain to everybody what was wrong with the insides, and I'm left with all of the things posted on Google. So I sit back and I wonder how exactly Chris managed to avoid telling Jared about the motor at all, or if he lied about it to make sure that Jared would post these videos about me. The last thing that my wife said to him when she told him I wasn't interested in taking his text messages or anything anymore was he needed closure to know why, after 5 years of being my friend, I just didn't want to know him anymore. And instead of me going off on him and telling him all the reasons, which are just pretty cruel and unnecessary, as to why I decided he was no longer allowed around me or my family, I just decided to walk away instead. Becky told him to just let it go and move on, think about what it was. She was enjoying how ridiculous it was and that he was almost as bad as a jealous ex. He said he can either be my friend or my worst enemy. He wanted closure. She said, the best you can do is represent who you are inside. I think it shows true the type of person he is. He is a person who has inherited everything from his parents. They taught him how to tinker on a carburetor. He chose to carburate everything, till eventually I helped him through it. And yet when I left, he went back to tinkering on carburetors for other people, just like his parents had showed him. He made an attempt of making a post or two on Rotary Works before he shut it down because he had nothing to offer. He doesn't actually have any skills or creativity to use skills that he does have. He's a very, very scared man. The man that I met and got to know that was outside of the car world was very scared and very hostile. He practiced shooting. He practiced shooting more for killing human beings and home protection than he ever did for hunting with his parents. The one time I went with, he walked around striding and talking about pink mist. He is the type of person that asked me one day what I think about the sanctity of marriage, knowing that I'm agnostic, and I'm not entirely sure I could ever hold anyone's true beliefs of tradition. However, I've been with my wife for 13 years, I've never cheated on her, and she's the only one I've ever been with. So, he wanted to know, as a very evangelical Christian, how I've managed to do it, considering he had failed a marriage, and apparently was either looking towards another marriage, or wondering how I managed to do it while he had failed. I'm not entirely sure the root of his question until I figured it out later, when I had met his coworker Betty Brown, who was married to another man. So after a while, I started pointing out that it's kind of his fault that the Jared Carpenter stuff happened, and he started making statements like this, which I find to be a little self-telling, considering that the person that he was married to left him for issues that are in the sexual department. He had dated many underage girls in the time that they had separated until he had met my aunt. My wife had stated several times that she was disturbed that the only time she had good sex with him was when her daughter wore skimpy clothing. When I relayed this to her, it was disregarded, but she as well has serious sexual dysfunction in her life. She got with my sister's father, my mom's ex-husband. If you think that my statements are out there, they're not. Just after I started making these statements to people, it turned out that his best friend and roommate, through high school until now, had been molesting children in his own house. He had confessed, open and clear. This wasn't the first time he had sex with an underage girl, and Chris knew about it. The previous time there was parent consent. This time it was even younger. And yet, although Chris had turned on me so fast for trying to take his car, apparently Chris is totally fine with child molestation because he stayed strong by his side the whole time. I sold a few more motors to the RX7 community, but I watched as the parts increased in price and Mazda quit doing it in 2015 in general. Having a problem with any of my engine builds or sales after that, I finally just decided to stop. I saw that the rotary shops all became hobby shops. All the people who actually wanted to do things sold their cars, and all the people who had their cars tried desperately to keep them on the road, selling each other parts for more and more and more money. Parts that they would swap back and forth that weren't worth anything more. They weren't fixed, they weren't new. They were just swapping them, upping the price each time that they did it. I couldn't do it anymore. About the time that I was finishing up my third gen, which I had put together beautifully and was just about finished, I couldn't handle it anymore. Every time I mentioned the word RX7, my name, it would pop up on Google. Someone would comment about this situation, and I just couldn't stomach it anymore. It wasn't worth it. So I sold everything. I bought myself a new car, 0 miles right off the lot. It was nice, still very nice. Then I decided I needed another project. I still stayed true to what I said. I still want to work on cars. So I started making videos of a couple of the cars that I've been picking up, such as a new Lincoln and an old Lincoln. Chris, of course, had to subscribe to me as soon as I started making videos. I've asked him several times to leave me alone, and he just won't. So that is how all this came to be. That is pretty much the end. Thanks for sticking out all this bullshit and listening to me spiel about it. That's all that happened. There's nothing else to it.